إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال خذها ولا تخف سنعيدها سيرتها الأولى وقال وأذن في الناس بالحج يأتوك رجالا وعلى كل ضامر يأتين من كل فج عميق. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. And we ask Him to send His greatest peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon his family and his companions, and upon all the believers until the Day of Judgment. Ya Rabbil Alameen. If I was to come to you and ask you a request, that you go in your car and you travel to the middle of Devon, find yourself a large field and stand and just begin to call the adhan, promising that people will come to you, flocking from every corner of the world. Or perhaps I tell you that you see a fire in front of you, or a live snake, and I say, don't worry, take it. There's nothing to fear. Of course, all of you should question my sanity, and indeed probably reject the very request that I'm saying. But these things, when they come from a source that is unquestionably the truth, the source of creation and the heavens and the earth, we find ourselves taking comfort in the requests, and we know that these requests are going to be something that will indeed be fulfilled. Trusting in Allah Azza wa Jal is a very interesting thing. We often hear requests of people wanting to improve their anxiety, improve their depression, improve their symptoms that they're facing, these worries and concerns. Now, this is of course not the medical side of things. Those who have medical issues of depression and anxiety should seek treatment from medical professionals. But we're talking about that everyday anxiety that people may face. The worry of where my income is going to come from. The worry of, is my job going to be secure? The worry of the homework that I need to give in, or the exams that I'm about to sit. How do we build our trust, and how do we build resilience in these times of difficulty? The stories that I gave you are not stories that are completely unfamiliar, but rather we find them in the Quran itself. After Musa alayhi salam climbed up the mountain to find himself speaking to Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah asked him to throw his staff. And after he threw his staff, he witnessed a miracle in that his staff magically turned into a snake, a living, breathing snake. Now that alone is enough to bring fear into the heart. And what we're going to talk about today is how to manage and build trust in Allah Azza wa Jal, taking prophetic incidents and taking incidents from the Quran to understand a clear three-step strategy in which we can build our resilience and enable us to trust in Allah Azza wa Jal. Musa in this instance is described interestingly in the Quran. Take it and don't fear. Showing that he had an emotional response to something that he knew to be true. He was speaking to Allah Azza wa Jal. He was a prophet of God. You couldn't have someone with more certainty in that moment in trusting Allah Azza wa Jal, but he had an emotion. But just like everything in the Quran, Allah places a sequence of words for a reason. Nothing is there coincidentally. Allah told him to act and then manage his emotions. To do and then to control his internal fear that he's fearing. The knower of the heavens and the earth, telling one of his greatest human beings to have lived, to act and to trust in Allah Azza wa Jal And Musa alayhi salam obliged. The other story is that of Ibrahim alayhi salam, taking his wife and children and leaving them in the middle of the desert. And if that wasn't trying enough, he was asked to build the house of Allah Azza wa Jal in a place that no people had previously even lived in until the tribe came and joined our beloved Prophet Ismail and Hajar. Imagine calling in the desert, calling the vastness and emptiness that you see and you feel in such a barren place. And imagine the trust Ibrahim alayhi salam must have had to perform such an act with such clear vision and understanding of where and what this will be transformed to become. When Allah Azza wa Jal tells us to trust or tells us to act upon something, He gives us an understanding and appreciation of the types of emotions and feelings that we'll feel. And with that, we'll outline our 3 clear steps, after which we'll go through a number of different stories to understand how we can build our trust, how we can manage our anxiety and our emotions in order to be able to come closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. The first is to pray to Allah. Take a breath, take a moment, and call upon Allah Azza wa Jal with the words of trust and asking Him to bring yourself into control. Allow you to come into alignment with what He's requesting. The second is to see the bigger picture. Allow yourself to imagine, as Ibrahim alayhi salam imagined what would happen and understood what would come of this incident. That people would come from all corners of the earth, coming into the Kaaba, coming into the place He's building, as Allah has fulfilled. See the bigger picture of what's going on to allow yourself to let your mind control your emotions. Be like Musa alayhi salam when he was told, take it and don't fear, سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. We will return it to its original form. Visualize that this will be a safe thing for you to do. And then finally, act, do, perform the thing Allah has asked you to do. After visualizing what it is you want to do, make sure you understand and act, and don't let yourself be dictated by your emotions. Allah placed the sequence of Musa's command as take it and then control. So after visualizing what it is you are doing, understand that when you do this, the rest will fall into place. Now these 2 stories expound a vast amount of interesting discussion. But we wanted to bring it back before we continue to each and every one of you sitting today. If I was to go to any person who was not Muslim and ask them for a whole day to refuse thinking for that day, to control their emotions, to control their anger, to not have any relations with their wife or spouse, anybody who would see these things, and indeed Muslims themselves see these things as difficult and withholding from pleasures. Indeed, the reason Allah Azza wa Jalla is rewarding us is because He feels that we are withholding from something that is halal and pleasurable for us. So He gives us that which is better. But by this point in Ramadan, each and every one of us would be in the groove of fasting. And after fasting for so many days, perhaps you've come to a point when you even begin to enjoy fasting. Now, what's particularly special about this Ramadan, unlike any other Ramadan before, is that previously we'd say Ramadan is a beautiful time because of the social gathering, because of meeting other people, friends, and it's a really communal spirit. But this Ramadan, we've all been forced to have a Ramadan in ourselves, a Ramadan alone with our families in our houses, where we can't even go to the masjid. But yet, many of the people I've spoken to have said this Ramadan has been even more precious than previous Ramadans, showing that the reason you're happy isn't even these other external benefits that you're seeing, these socializing, these happy moments of meeting people, but rather it's something deeper in what Allah has told you. Ramadan is perhaps the most visual and physical understanding you can have of the trust of Allah Azza wa Jal. We call upon Allah as step one. We see ourselves wanting to fast Ramadan. The second is we see the bigger picture. We understand that every previous Ramadan has been a pleasurable one. So this Ramadan will be the same. And of course, three, we act upon that which we do, we know. And then we see the realities of these pleasures. Trusting in Allah Azza wa Jal is something which you train yourself to get better at. And you train yourself through the cauldron of acting. And that when you do something over and over again, it becomes more and more intuitive. Such that you reach a stage where it becomes such a norm for you to behave in this way, because Allah Azza wa Jal has proven to you and shown you so many times that this outcome will be best. So the first example for you to take away today is everything I'm going to say to you today can be shown in the very fast that you're doing now. Something that everybody outside of our community might think this is extremely difficult, but everyone inside of our community knows to be very beautiful. How the outward actions are not the best judges, but rather we take the snake, trusting in Allah Azza wa Jal to turn it into a staff. We call in the desert, trusting that Allah will bring the people, and we withhold from our food and drink, trusting that Allah will give us a greater happiness in doing so. Indeed, when we look at our own perceptions of reality, we can look at things to be pleasure, but in fact are the opposite. Imam Ghazali observes the heights of pleasure of each of the different senses, noting that the greatest form of pleasure in food, the highest level of enjoyment that they had at the time of any food that they can eat would be honey. And honey is merely the vomit of a bee. The greatest material of clothing that you can wear is the excrements of a worm. Cloth, silk. The greatest smell that you can have is the mucus of a gazelle. The greatest drink you can have is from the udder of a cow, the bosom of a cow. And finally, the greatest physical sensation you can have is the meeting of two urinary ducts. But yet each of us understand through our own experience of the world that these very things that, if we go to anybody who is unexperienced in these things, ask a child of why and what a mother and father take pleasure in, or ask a person who's unfamiliar with the process of a bee producing honey, they'll be disgusted at the thought of eating vomit, of wearing excrements, of smelling mucus. But yet each of us have come to learn and appreciate that these pleasures are indeed good for us. So if we can have that same thinking in the worldly sense, we can adopt the same thinking about other worldly sense. If we can trust our physical touch, that the excrements of a worm will feel good for us, then we can trust the knower of knowers, the creator of everything, that what he's telling us to do, contrary to our own understanding, will be better for us. So in us seeking to improve our trust, in managing our anxiety, in managing the difficulties we face, when we're living in a world and reality when things seem very unclear and uncertain for us, and we're unsure of what may come in the coming weeks and months, we take the following 3 steps. We take a breath. We call upon Allah Azza wa Jal and take a moment to call upon the Creator who created our emotions to bring our emotions into control, who created all affairs to bring our affairs into control. The second is we see and we visualize and we understand in the clearest possible sense the promise and the pleasure that Allah has placed, so that we can experience and allow that to overcome the emotions that we're feeling in that moment. And the final and most important step is that we act, and we don't let our emotions dictate the individual steps that we're doing. after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, one of his final commands that he gave prior to his passing was to send the army of Usama bin Zayd, a young general aged 18, who he placed the head of an army to combat the coming Roman garrison that came and was planning to destroy the Muslims in Medina. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, many people who were Muslim at the time of the Prophet ﷺ apostated. They left their faith. And people began to rebel, refusing to pay zakah, refusing to do much of the obligations that were obliged to them, that they'd agreed to under the Islamic legal rulings that they had signed up for. Now in that moment, many people came to our beloved Khalifa, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, and advised him, perhaps now is not the best time for us to be sending this army. Perhaps we should rethink and bring these people under a single banner to kind of bring state and order into our own affairs. The Roman Empire isn't our greatest priority right now. But Sayyidina Abu Bakr thought in a very different way. Sayyidina Abu Bakr was the man in the cave with the Prophet ﷺ when people just needed to look at their knee level to discover them and kill them. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "La takhaf, inna Allah ma'ana." Don't fear, but Allah is with us. فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَيْهِ. And Allah bestowed upon Abu Bakr a peace and tranquility. Sayyidina Abu Bakr was a man who people wished to be even a strand of hair within his blessed body for the amount of reward and good deeds that he did. He was a man, the Prophet ﷺ described that every single person who became Muslim was rewarded and was recompensed for their faith, except Abu Bakr. And he left his reward for Allah Azza wa Jal. Sayyidina Abu Bakr, when he was in this moment, a moment when required the courage and fortitude, took a moment that held our nation together and led Islam to spread across the world. He trusted the command of Allah Azza wa Jal, the command of Allah that came through his beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sent the army, and in doing so, proved to be the greatest decision he could have done in that moment. People saw him sending an army to the Romans, and many thought this power that the people of Medina must have must be immense, that they can afford to send an army there whilst this is going on. And many of them came back into the fold without needing to fight. Sayyidina Abu Bakr's opinion and trust in Allah Azza wa Jal, and knowledge that if he followed what the Prophet ﷺ had ordered, that would be what's best. So we remind ourselves, how do we build trust in Allah Azza wa Jal? How do we come to learn and embody and control our emotions? The first is we take a breath. We call upon Allah Azza wa Jal. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bring our affairs and our emotions in order. He's the creator. He's the sustainer. He maintains everything and knows everything. So ask Him and pray to Him first. The second, visualize. Allow yourself to understand with crystal clarity of the promise that Allah has given, of the truth that He is telling you to see. Picture it as though it's already happened. And the third is act. Don't hold back. And let your emotions come into control through the course of acting. We see the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he describes the opposite of such affairs. What happens if we succeed to our desires and immorality? What happens if we decide not to listen to Allah Azza wa Jal? Well, anybody who does so thinking that their decision of what they're doing is going to bring them pleasure. The Prophet ﷺ says in a lengthy hadith narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, where he lists 5 things that people begin to do. And each of these 5 things is rooted in a sense of self-desire, sense of wanting to achieve what's best for you. Now this is the reverse of trust of Allah. This is us conceding to our own emotions and our own feelings, believing that what Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us isn't actually true. And our short-sightedness is preventing us from being able to see what Allah Azza wa Jal wants us to do as being a good thing. The Prophet ﷺ says, immorality never appears amongst the people. Immorality as an action is something where people choose not to be moral, not to be obedient to what Allah Azza wa Jal had dictated. Immorality never spreads amongst the people except that plagues and disease befalls upon them, never known to their predecessors. When we concede to our own desires, thinking what we're doing is good, the reverse comes back to us through the own actions that we've done. As Allah said, that everything we do and the sins that we do, بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ, from what the human beings have wrought upon themselves. So the Prophet ﷺ says, when immorality spreads, the consequence is that plagues and disease coming back in return. The opposite of the thing that we're seeking to achieve. When people begin to cheat in weights and measure, when people come to buy something from you and you shortchange them, thinking that what? You're going to become wealthier, you're saving money in this instance. Famine and severe calamity comes as a result. You think you're saving money. You think that outwardly I have kept a pound or two. I've extended the amount of milk or weight or grain that I have. But that action has actually done the opposite of what you think it will do. The third, whoever withholds zakah, again thinking it's going to protect their wealth, and so much of this is associated to our wealth. So much of this is associated to money, which is often the motivator for what we do. We withhold our zakah, our charity, thinking that it will be wealthier for us, it will be better for us, but Allah withholds the rain, so it doesn't fall upon them. Our actions fit in this intricate web of qadar, of decree that Allah has created. A set of rules with actions that we can't always know the consequences of. When we act thinking we know the next step is going to be better for us, Allah brings something else through the consequence of what we did. It's a simple button we press thinking it will switch on the light, but causes the house to break. When we trust in Allah Azza wa Jal, not only will He bring the good which He promises us, but when He tells us to stay away from evil, He's averting the harm that we'll bring upon ourselves. The fourth is, they do not break the covenant with Allah and His Messenger, but Allah will enable the enemies to overpower them. When you remove your subjugation to Allah Azza wa Jal, the Creator of the heavens and the earth, when you refuse to obey the commands that Allah Azza wa Jal has placed upon us, then He will place a ruler that is unjust and unfair, because you refuse the justice, the fairness and the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal. And finally, when leaders rule according to the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, or rather they refuse to rule by the justice that Allah Azza wa Jal has placed within His book, Allah causes civil strife and unrest to spread as a consequence of that injustice. What we see in this hadith and in each of these actions is that what Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us to do, what we have to trust in Allah to follow, is going to be beneficial or harmful to ourselves. And we remind ourselves of our 3 steps of how we can nurture this trust in Allah Azza wa Jal. The first is we call upon Allah Azza wa Jal, we ask Him, we pray to Him to bring ourselves, our emotions, our affairs in order that we can be able to be trusting and following His command. The second is we visualize and picture with absolute clarity the truth of what Allah has given. That we only need to hear this hadith in order to believe its truth. We only need to hear of the promise of Jannah in order to strive and seek for it. but we visualize it with absolute clarity of what pleasures we can enjoy and what difficulties we will suffer if we were to obey or disobey Allah Azza wa Jal. And then finally, we act upon what Allah has told us. We do the thing Allah has said, trusting and visualizing what Allah has told us to do, and knowing that its truth will be manifest before us. Each of these things is a step-by-step process for us to come to learn to trust Allah Azza wa Jal. But the hadith I want to finish upon is a hadith that perhaps is the most important of all that I'm about to mention. The Prophet ﷺ says, Al-a'malu bil-khawatim. Actions are decided based on their endings. Trust is something that is acquired through experience. Some of us may be close enough to Allah Azza wa Jal that we only need to hear a command in order for us to know its truth. But those are few and far between. And for the majority of us, myself and others, we have to go through the processes in order for us to understand the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows this, and the Prophet ﷺ knows this, such that they will only judge us by the final thing that we do. Such that, for example, one time we decide to disobey Allah Azza wa Jal in something. We see something we shouldn't have seen. We do something we shouldn't have done. And then something befalls us, or a consequence happens as a result of our action. Just as a child who wants to experience the fire may place their finger on the hot cauldron. Their fingers burning. They learn their lesson. The important act is what you do thereafter. How you act after you've learnt your lesson. Allah Azza wa Jal will judge us after we've come to experience things. And trust in Allah Azza wa Jal is something that we nurture with time. Allow yourself and be forgiving for yourself for anything that's happened before. Maybe we made something that we came to learn was bad for us. Or maybe we did something, or rather didn't do something that we came to learn we should have done that would be good for us. Allow yourself to recall past experiences, things that you've done before in order for you to understand what you should do now. And just like Ramadan, year on year gets easier and easier as we recall each Ramadan previously and the pleasures that it brought about. The Prophet ﷺ saying, Al-a'malu bil-khawatim, is telling us that our final actions are what matter. So let yourself build trust in Allah Azza wa Jal through your day-to-day experiences. When you begin to worry about the money that might not come from your job security, or you begin to worry about the exams that you're unsure whether you'll pass or not, or whether you begin to worry about any of the affairs, whether your children will be raised righteous, any sort of worry, trust that Allah Azza wa Jal has looked after you thus far, and He's taken you to where you are at this very day. And the one who looked after you and created you, through your trust in Allah Azza wa Jal, will only ever increase you. Allah Azza wa Jal has dictated a law in this universe. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you are grateful, I'll give you more. And in your trust in Allah, in your gratitude, preempting Allah's mercy and His divine sustenance that is going to come to you in the moments of difficulty, Allah gives you even more for your trust. In an infinite spiral that only gets bigger and bigger, the more you trust, the more you get. The more grateful you are for that, the more you get in return. The more grateful you are, the more you get. Because Allah says, وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. Very few of my servants can be grateful. May Allah empower us to have true trust in Allah Azza wa Jal. May He allow us to be like that of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, where when he sees the staff thrown, witnessing a miracle turning it into a snake, he trusts in Allah Azza wa Jal, he controls his emotion, and he knows that the one who did the miracle in the first place, the one who turned it into a snake from a staff. Let our past experiences dictate our future expectations of Allah. Let our knowledge of other stories allow us to understand how Allah will act with us. As we come to these last 10 nights, nights which Allah has placed within it a single night worth 83 years, 1,000 months. Trust that Allah will allow you to experience days of Qadr. Trust that your sleeplessness for a single night will be worth a lifetime's worth of worship. Allow yourself to give in order to get. Because Allah wants us to take the first step. Commit yourself to giving charity, trusting that Allah will multiply it for you. I've seen experience after experience of people giving money and instantly being given something back in return. I know a friend of mine who gave some money to somebody as a loan, and instantly Allah Azza wa Jal repaid them with 10 times the money they'd given. I know people who've given charity and overnight something happened in the stock market and they were repaid the exact money that they gave and more. Trust that Allah Azza wa Jal won't disappoint you in His promise. When He says a single donation is worth 700 times its reward, trust that Allah Azza wa Jal will repay you with 700 times the money that you've given. And if you struggle with that trust, learn through experience. Give and see what will happen. Because Allah Azza wa Jal never ever forgets the affairs of His believers. Inshallah, we're trying this Ramadan to raise £100,000 for our charity causes. All of it will be going to charity. And we've created different means in which you can support this through our app on the Quran Club. Help us in achieving this target, or give to any cause that you see fit. And Allah Azza wa Jal will be a bigger and better compensator for what you've given. And somebody reminded me something that I thought was important to mention. This is a time of year where many of our huffaz often receive gifts for the work and their effort of recitation. And many of them may be dependent on this income, but without telling us that they're dependent on this. Perhaps we can start some form of fund or communal gift where we can pay these people who this year have been unable to recite the Quran for us. Not without a lack of intention of doing so. They were preparing all year, revising the Quran, doing it for the sake of Allah alone. And let us perhaps give some form of gift to your usual qari that you attend at the masjid, in order for them to perhaps have some comfort that our community still look after them just as they look after us. This is the month of forgiveness. This is the month when people will be written as prohibited from going into hellfire. And this is the last 10 nights in which, if you were to witness it, every wish will be granted. Every act is multiplied. And every decree from Allah Azza wa Jal descends within that night. May Allah allow us to witness Laylatul Qadr. May Allah allow us to be from those who are written to be prohibited from hellfire. May Allah place trust in our hearts and control our emotions to allow us to turn to Allah in our times of difficulty. Unfortunately, this isn't a khutbah in the sense of it's not a Jum'ah Salah. So you'll still need to pray your 4 rak'ahs of Dhuhr. Pray them in congregation with your family and whoever is with you in your residence in order to get 27 times the reward of praying alone. جزاكم الله خير. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.